Hi everyone. So I felt the need to wear black today given the topic of this video because as you saw in the title, I have officially lost my first houseplant. It is definitely a dark day in my household. But it gets worse. In addition to losing my first houseplant, I have actually also lost my first outdoor potted plant. Seriously feel like I just can't win right now, you guys. So I am going to share with you what I think happened and what circumstances led to the death of both of those plants. And then we're also going to take a look at some other plants that I have that are struggling right now and that I'm kind of basically having to try and rehab and save. And then at the end of this video, I'm actually going to give you an update on one of the plants that you know I had a struggle with because it happened during filming my repotting video back in the springtime, and that is my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. So I want to give you guys an update on where it is now, what I've been having to do to it, and where we're going in the future. But first, let's go ahead and talk about the houseplants that I have lost. And yes, I said houseplants plural, although really it's kind of a complicated situation. So if you guys will remember from some of my past videos, the very first houseplant I had, I grew from seed. And it was a gift that I got from the company that ran my credit card processing when I owned my fitness studio. And so they had sent me one of those pots, and it has the little peat moss disc that you hydrate and seeds and you plant it and it grows into a plant. So basically, it grew 5 of my money plants for me. Now they were all in one pot, but eventually they were overcrowding each other and I had to break them up into separate pots. So one pot had 2 of them in it, another pot had another 2 in it, and then one pot had 1 by itself. So the one plant that was planted by itself was the first of the money plants to get spider mites, and it got them bad. I mean, bad. And I will say that for whatever reason, this plant does not respond well to pest treatments in general, and I'm not sure why. It's not like it has super delicate leaves or anything like that, but it just really does not like it. The leaves tend to then kind of dry up and crisp up and die off. And, you know, maybe that part of that has to do with it was already had so much damage from the spider mites that it was going to die anyway. I'm not sure. But all I know is I kept treating it, leaves kept crisping up and dying off, and it just became an ongoing battle. And eventually I did get rid of the spider mites, but I think the damage was just already done. And it just kept declining, and now it's gone. And unfortunately, after that, we were okay. All the other ones were okay. They were living in a different area at the time. Both of the other pots of plants were living in my kitchen, and nobody had gotten spider mites. And then all of a sudden one day, webbing everywhere on one of them. And so I immediately started treating it. Once again, totally stressed out about it. I treated the other one as well because it was also living in the kitchen, but I saw no signs of spider mites on it. And after that, I still saw no signs of spider mites on that one for the longest time. But the other one did get a pretty bad infestation, just like the first plant, and I did lose one of the plants in that pot. Now, I will point out that the one plant in that pot had been kind of the runt of the bunch, and so it was already still kind of struggling to establish itself in the first place. And I mean, over the course of 2 years now, it's been struggling to establish itself. So it only had like, I think 2 or 3 leaves at the time that the spider mite thing happened. So I'm not that surprised that that one died off. But as you can see, we still have a decent number of leaves on this one. There are some new leaves trying to come in, but you can also see what I'm talking about the leaves that are dying off and what they're looking like. So that's where we are with that one. Now, the other one that didn't get spider mites in the kitchen, and I have been checking very closely every time I water it to see if it might have spider mites. Out of nowhere though, about a week ago, went and checked it, webbing everywhere. I mean, it's like they just pop up out of nowhere and it becomes insanely bad infestation like overnight. So once again, immediately started treating that plant. I have been having leaf loss off of that one. This is still fairly early on in the process of trying to eradicate them on that one. So as you can see here, we still have a decent number of leaves, but I'm just still kind of worried about it. I need to give it at least one more treatment to try to make sure that I've eradicated them, but it is living upstairs in the quarantine room as well. And hopefully these 2 will actually survive. However, I do feel the need to point out that these are what are called biennial plants, which means these plants are only supposed to live for 2 years anyways. And we reached 2 years from the time that I first planted those seeds back in May. So theoretically, these plants should be about to die off naturally regardless. Part of me was like, I got rid of the spider mites and then it just died because it's been alive for 2 years and it's a biennial plant, right? But I'm not sure that that's the case because they're supposed to flower and seed before they die. Now, there's also a question in my mind of, well, they're living in my house, so maybe that wasn't gonna happen in my home environment, and maybe they just died without flowering and seeding. But I don't know, it's hard to say. I really do think though, because the one that died, you know, just the way it went down, I feel pretty confident that it was related to the spider mites. So I am hopeful that I have fully eradicated the spider mites off of the remaining ones and everything will be okay, and that maybe here in the next month or so we'll flower and seed, but who knows, we'll see. But moving on, I did say I have also lost my first outdoor plant, and that was my beautiful Petra croton. And once again, spider mites. I hate spider mites, you guys. I hate spider mites so much. This plant has been struggling with them since the end of last summer. I think it actually might have gotten them after I had moved it into the garage for over the winter. And I don't know, I struggled to get them off there, and this plant does not like to be moved. It doesn't like to be messed with. So once again, a plant that really just doesn't appreciate pest treatments. Not that the pest treatment is actually hurting it. It is just a fussy, finicky plant. And so I thought we were doing pretty well when I moved it out into the outdoors for the spring. And yeah, nope. I moved it outside and it started dropping leaves. Now, once again, it doesn't like to be moved, and so I kind of expected that. Now, I also didn't put it back in direct light. I actually had it on my patio table underneath the patio umbrella, so it was getting shaded because I didn't want to submit it directly back into high light right away. But we kept dropping leaves. And eventually we had no leaves, but I kept treating it for spider mites, the soil, the stems that were now bare, everything. And then I started to see new buds popping up all over the branches, and I had hope. I was like, yay, we're gonna get new growth, we're coming back. And then slowly but surely, I started seeing more webbing just even on the soil, on the stems, and those little buds that were trying to come in all started crisping up and falling off, and yeah. And to be honest with you, this plant probably died like a month and a half, 2 months ago, but I kind of left it there and watered it occasionally, hoping maybe something would pop back up. But I pulled it out of its pot yesterday and decided, looking at the roots, that it's done. So rest in peace, Petra croton. I don't know what I'm gonna replace you with. It's probably not gonna happen anytime soon because I feel like at this point in summer, I think I might as well just wait until next spring to replace that plant with a new one. But before we move on to plants that are struggling for reasons other than pest problems, let's take a moment to talk about two other plants. And one of them is the Oxalis, aka shamrock, that I got a couple plant hauls ago that I showed you. So I got this plant back in the spring, told you guys all about how excited I was to have an Oxalis, that my mom has one that she's had for longer than I've been alive. But after I got that Oxalis and after I showed it to you, I started noticing some weird things happening with it, and I had inspected it very closely for pests when I bought it. I gave it a treatment anyway, even though I didn't see anything when I got it home, but it was just acting really odd. And then one day I went to water it and I noticed spider mite webbing all over the soil. And when you see it all over the soil, that means that soil is infested, and it's really uncommon for you to see that on the soil unless an infestation is really, really bad, because they prefer to be on the leaves. So when I saw that, it had been less than 2 weeks since I had owned that plant. And honestly, you guys, I was dealing with spider mites on other plants at that time too. That was around the time I had the outbreak from Toby carrying them all over the place. So then I got that plant, brought it into the home. And when I saw that, I was like, nope, nuh-uh, didn't sign up for this. And I returned that plant. So it is very unusual for me to return a plant. But that situation, I was just like, this is bad. Like, to see all that webbing on the soil, I was like, I do not want to start off with a plant that I've never owned before, by the way. That was the first Oxalis I had ever owned. I don't want to set myself up for that kind of struggle or failure off the bat. So since I had only had it for less than 2 weeks, I took it back. And I highly encourage you guys to do the same thing if you ever find yourself in the same situation, because that was just not something I needed in my life at that time. But I will get another Oxalis eventually, probably this coming spring, because that's usually when they start coming out and they have bigger, fuller, healthier looking ones. So stay tuned for that. But the last plant I want to talk about that is struggling due to pests before we move on to other issues is my beautiful, and you're seeing what she originally looked like when I first got her right now, Dichondra Silver Falls. And I have told you guys in all the videos that I've talked about this plant that she did get mealy bugs, or perhaps she already had them when I got her and I just didn't see them. But we've been fighting mealy bugs since about a month or a month and a half since I got her. And she's just so like tiny, dense foliage that it's just so hard to get them all. And they just kept coming back. And I honestly am super lucky that they did not spread to any of my other plants. Now, she was living hanging behind my couch in my living room, and there were no plants directly under her, but there were plants like off to the sides, and the mealybugs could have crawled down and off the plant and onto those plants if they wanted to, but apparently they just were super happy living on her because I have not gotten any on anybody else. But I've been taking a huge risk leaving her there. And so it finally got to the point where I was just like, I've risked it too much for too long. And I did see a lot of ladybug larva activity going on in my backyard. And so I made the decision to move her outside and hang her outside in the hopes that some of those natural predators would help to finally eradicate the bugs. Now, I have been keeping a close eye on it, and I am spraying periodically only if I don't see beneficial bugs on her to help try and get rid of those mealybugs still. But for now, she's living out there. I'm hoping they're gonna go away. I'm hoping she's gonna make a comeback, but I have propagated her significantly and harvested tons of seeds off of her, which I'm growing as well. So even if Mama doesn't make it, we have Mama's babies to replace her. But fingers crossed those ladybug larvae are gonna help do the trick. So the next two plants that I am struggling with that I'm gonna talk about are both Scindapsus, and both of these had a similar circumstance with them and is something that annoys the crap out of me, and so we are definitely going to go into a little bit more detail on these ones today. But I want to start with my Scindapsus trubii moonlight. And I think you guys saw this plant perhaps once and only once, and I think it might have been in the Plants for Underwaters video, if I recall correctly. But the reason you haven't seen it since then is because this plant just, it is not done well. And I knew when I got it that it was in a highly cocoa coir based potting mixture. I mean, it was pretty much all cocoa coir. And I knew that wasn't going to be great for that plant, but I've bought plants in that kind of mixture before, and they've been fine acclimating in my home for like a month, and then I repot them into better soil. Well, apparently that is not what you need to do with the Scindapsus moonlight. So if anybody out there gets one, I will tell you what I tell everybody now. Repot it right away as soon as you get it home, because I will guarantee you that that plant is in pure cocoa coir. I don't know why the growers are doing it. Well, I kind of know why the growers are doing it. It means that they have to water less frequently, but it is not the appropriate medium for that type of plant. And in your home, it is not in the kind of environment it is with the growers. And so it's not going to use up the moisture out of that cocoa coir as quickly, and you're going to end up with root rot. Now, the other thing is, a lot of growers, I won't mention them out loud, but you guys know who I'm talking about. These growers, they like to sell you what are not fully rooted cuttings. And so here's what I discovered a month after I had had my Scindapsus moonlight. I had actually started to see some leaf loss, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess I better go ahead and get it out of this mix now. And this is what I found, and you can see this. These are not fully rooted cuttings at all. There are some roots here, and the ones that are there were already starting to get rotted, and yeah, it was bad. So I gave this my standard root rot treatment. I potted them up in smaller individual pots in appropriate soil, and I was planning on just letting them each develop their roots there and then combining them back into a bigger pot later once they had gotten root bound. Well, we didn't make it that far, you guys. This plant is a nightmare, and everybody I've talked to who has owned one and has not repotted it right away has had this same experience that I have. And it got to the point where finally I was like, you know what? Let's try rooting you in water. So I took all of those cuttings that were still alive, because some of them had died, and I cut off all the roots, re-dipped them in my hydrogen peroxide water root rot treatment mix, and then put them into vessels of water and tried to root them there. And so here's where we're at today with that. So this is the most recent one, because there was one plant that seemed like it was gonna make it in soil. Didn't happen. I don't know why I didn't just move it over when I moved the other ones, but this was the last remaining leaf off of that plant. So about a week ago, I put this into water. And as you guys can see, we are starting to get some root development going on here. If the camera will focus, there we go. There's some little roots starting to develop down there. So I am gonna leave this in water until those get more developed, and hopefully they will continue to get more developed to the point where I feel comfortable putting it back into soil. But then I do have, this is one of the earliest ones that I moved into water, and it is starting to push out. Well, it looked like it was trying to push out a new leaf right here, but I think maybe this was an old leaf that was trying to push out before I moved it into water. But this one has gotten some significant root growth, and it's got a new shoot going on from above where the roots were starting. So as you can see right there, come on camera, focus, there we go. So you can see that is a new little leaf shoot coming off there, and those roots are coming off the base of that, which is interesting to me because there are other places down here where roots could have come in, but they haven't. And so we still don't have a ton of roots. I also don't like that the tips of these are looking kind of brown, but it's not rotted. I'm feeling it, it's fine, it's firm, I don't know. But I'm gonna leave it in water and hope that this develops more, and when I feel like it has developed enough to maybe make it in soil, I will try and move it back into soil. Now the last part of this plant that I still have left is what I would refer to, or what people would refer to as a wet stick, meaning it's just a stick, there's no leaves on it. And this has just recently started to get some root development there on the end, but yeah, whether or not this is actually going to produce a new leaf, even though it's producing roots, you never know. And I will tell you guys, wet sticks really aren't a thing. And it's a whole nother video to explain to you guys what I mean about that. But let me just put it this way. If anybody is selling a wet stick of a plant, don't buy it. Just don't buy it. Because even though it might produce roots for you like this, there's a good chance that it will never produce anything but roots for you. And after a period of time, those roots will die and you'll be left with a dead stick. Once again, whole nother video to talk about that. Maybe I'll do that one day in the future, but really don't spend your money on wet sticks. It's not worth it. But we'll see what happens with this one. I'm not holding out high hopes for this one. And if I'm being honest with you, I don't know that I'm holding out high hopes for the other two either, because this plant just seems to be a bit of a pain in the butt. So once again, if you want to own one of these, I highly recommend you repot it as soon as you get it. Make sure those roots look super healthy. If they look like crap, return the plant. Now this next Scindapsus, similar situation. I had it for a while. I thought we were fairly rooted when I got the plant. Turns out we weren't. This is not from the same grower that I had flashed up on screen before. This grower was not labeled anywhere on the pot, so I don't know who's responsible for this mess. And it wasn't in horrible soil, but what I discovered when I got around to repotting it was that it was a bunch of pretty much fully unrooted, like hardly any roots cuttings. So as you can see here, even worse than the Scindapsus moonlight. And this is my Scindapsus pictus argyraeus, and I absolutely love this plant because it has a similar look to the Scindapsus exotica that I've shown you before, but much smaller leaves. But unfortunately, when I discovered this mess, I was like, you've gotta be kidding me. This actually literally happened the day after I repotted the Scindapsus moonlight, by the way. So once again, that was not a great week for me. But I've been rehabbing that plant, and I have thankfully not had to move any of those to water to try to resolve the issue. I did give them all my root rot treatment, just like I did with the moonlight one, and then I potted them up into smaller pots and was leaving them there to root, and then eventually was going to combine them back into a larger pot. Now, I did just recently, in the last, I think, 2 weeks, combine them into a pot together, but what I ended up doing, because they really weren't ready for like a 6-inch pot, I actually took a container from Whole Foods, and you can see this is kind of a shallow container. It's maybe, I don't know, maybe 2.5, 3 inches deep, but it's a little bit wider. It's like a 5-inch diameter. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna put them in here together and let them finish developing those roots more before I move them into a deeper pot. And we actually are doing pretty well. I have lost 2 leaves since repotting them up into this pot, but the ones that are still here are looking pretty good. Now, some of them do look curled, as you can see. On Scindapsus, when leaves get that way due to trauma or underwatering or overwatering or whatnot, it takes a lot longer, in my experience, for Scindapsus leaves to straighten or flatten back out than on a lot of other plants. So I'm not concerned about it. It'll get there eventually, but I can see some new root growth happening and creeping around in the soil in the bottom of this pot. So that's actually giving me high hopes that this plant is now well along its way to being fully recovered. Now, the next plant I want to talk to you guys about that I'm struggling with is actually my string of dolphins. And you guys saw this plant, I think, for the first time when I did my string of plants care video. And I mentioned in that video that I know it had been overwatered because it was sitting on a table at the shop and there was a sign on the table that said, do not water. So somebody had been overwatering the plants on that table. Now, I did slip it out of its pot when I got it. It was just a little 2-inch plant. The roots looked okay to me, but apparently I was incorrect in my assessment because we started going downhill pretty quickly about maybe 2 weeks after I filmed that Senecio Care video. And every time I would slip the plant out, I would be like, what is going on? It wasn't like it was getting root rot because it was getting all the way dried out. What I think now might have happened, and there's a term people like to throw around called dry rot, and I'm not going to get too much into dry rot in this video. It's really a whole nother topic, but people have this assumption that sometimes when you let a plant dry out too far and it gets totally dry roots and then you rewater it, that those roots then can get root rot from being reintroduced to water too quickly or at a greater rate than what it was at. I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with the whole thought process behind dry rot, but once again, that's a whole nother video. But that is kind of the only thing that I could think might have happened here. And perhaps what went down was they had been overwatering those plants on that table, and then the people put the sign out saying don't water them. So then this plant got a little bit too dry, and then I brought it home and watered it, and it was in a new environment and whatever, and it went into shock. I don't know. That's kind of the thought process that I'm having on it anyway. So when I started seeing that happening on this plant, and I will tell you right now, this is kind of what I do with any kind of succulent plant when I see something going wrong with the roots, because it is way more difficult to salvage a root situation on a succulent, in my experience anyways, than it is on any other plant. So I immediately chopped all the roots off of that string of dolphins, and I started trying to regrow roots just from scratch, both in water and on soil. So I have had 2 of the branches in a little shot glass of water here for a while. And so as you can see, let me get this one out to show you, we are starting to get roots on this one. Hopefully you'll be able to tell, they're really small. Hopefully you guys can see him down here at the bottom. But we're getting a little bit of roots, and succulents get pretty fine roots, so it's kind of hard to see them. And they do seem to take longer to root in water, in my experience with succulents, than they do with soil. But I wanted to put some in water just in case. And so the rest of the ones, I set them on top of a little 2-inch pot of soil, and I've just been misting the top of the soil to keep it moist enough to want those roots to develop. And we are actually getting new growth on one of these that's in here, and I can see roots growing off of some of the other ones. So hopefully you guys can see up here without me dumping soil everywhere. But so they're just sitting there on the top of the soil, but we are getting some new growth. So the roots are developing here, they are developing in the water. So I'm hoping here in the next few months, I will be able to combine these back together and I will have a 2-inch string of dolphins again. Now I have done this before. I know this works. I feel 100% confident that I can get this to happen. But I also have never owned a string of dolphins before now, so I'm just really hoping this is going to behave like it does with a string of bananas or with a string of pearls. And yeah, as long as it does, we'll be good to go, but I'll be sure to give you guys an update in the future. Okay, so as I mentioned at the start of this video, the one plant that you guys know that I had been having a struggle with was my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. And the last time I showed it to you guys, we were still trying to get new roots growing. I had repotted it, given that root rot treatment, but we really weren't producing a ton of new roots, and the ones we were producing were still really small for what they should be for this plant. And that's when one of you guys had commented that you had discovered your Rhaphidophora tetrasperma was a plug, and had mentioned that what you had done eventually was just cut the plant up, remove all the roots, and restart them in water, and that when you did that, the roots came back in like twice as thick and robust. And so at a certain point, I decided, why not? Let's just give it a go. So I ended up cutting the plant up into 3 parts, putting those 3 parts in individual vessels of water, and developing new roots that way. And I'm here to tell you that the viewer who told me that was 100% right. The roots did come in way more robust, way stronger looking. And so then about 2 to 3 weeks ago, I potted those up individually into soil, and we are still developing roots like mad, and we're pushing out new leaves. Now, before I show you the mama plant, or what is now 3 parts of the mama plant, I will remind you that before I ever even filmed that repotting video, I had propagated this plant once. And I do want to show you where that propagation is at today, because it has really taken off. So this is the original propagation that I did of my Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, and look how great this plant is looking. I mean, beautiful. We are pumping out tons of new leaves now that we're well into this year's traditional growing season. And yeah, this plant is looking awesome. And so, oh, we even have a new leaf coming out right now, I just noticed. So my plan is actually to take all of these individual Rhaphidophora tetraspermas I have now, and once they are fully rooted, which this one is almost root bound, I want to pot them all up together and make a fuller pot of Rhaphidophora tetraspermas. and I may even add some sort of pole into that pot for them to climb on. But Mama's baby, like I said, looks fabulous, so let's look at Mama. So once again, cut her up into 3 parts. So I'm going to show you the bottom part first. So this was the base of the original mother plant, and this one has taken off in terms of new growth and roots way quicker than the middle part that I cut and the top part that I cut. So as you can see here, we already have 2 new leaves coming out here, and this is the newest one right here, has fenestration. So super excited about that. I actually was kind of shocked that this first one that came out wasn't fenestrated because she was already so fenestrated. And you can see here I did have to cut part of this leaf, got funky and bad when we were going through this process. But yeah, all in all, she's coming back. And I actually can see, let's see, oh no, that's on a different one. I'll show you in a second. But let me see if you can see some of these roots that are starting to grow around in this pot. I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see, but if you can see the roots like right over here, starting to grow around in there. And so we are getting more and more root development. Like I said, it's only been a few weeks since I moved her into soil, but definitely we are doing great. We're pumping out new growth already, which makes me extremely happy. And I will say that we still only lost, I think, a total of 3 leaves off of the original mama plant throughout this whole process. That is amazing. I guess I should say 3.5 because of the situation, but I'm still amazed, and I'm just super happy that we are getting well-established roots on our own outside of the whole plug situation. And so I have really, really high hopes for what's going to happen here. So let's look at the middle cut from the original mother plant, because that one is also producing new growth. We've gotten 2 new leaves in, and we got 2 more coming in, and it looks like there's a new growth point coming in from the soil as well. So here's what this plant looked like, and this was the only leaf that was still on this plant. Actually, I take that back. This leaf, and there was another one. That one was one of the ones that I did lose, but we have rooted. We have these 2 new leaves that have been put out. We got a new one coming in here, and there's another new one coming in over here. Now, I want you to think about what I just said. We got new leaves coming in here, new leaves coming in here, and there is another leaf coming in from underneath the soil. What that means is this went from being a single vine Rhaphidophora tetrasperma to now being a 4-vine Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. And sometimes that can happen, but it's kind of rare. But I'm super happy it is, because we're gonna have an even fuller plant because of it. But let's see if you can see these roots. This one, they're kind of swirling mostly around the bottom. See if you can see there at the very bottom of that pot, that root that is kind of growing around. And then over here, you can see there's even some more going in there, and they all look super healthy and way thicker than the original roots and the roots that the plant was trying to regrow when I had moved it straight back to soil. So all in all, I'm really happy with this. Now I will say that the top cutting from this plant is developing roots. We do have the one original leaf here, and that was the only leaf that was on this one when I took the cutting. And we are, like I said, getting roots. You can see down in here, if it will focus, there are roots growing in there. We're developing, but I haven't seen any new growth pushing out yet. So I'm not sure if it's just because this was the top cutting. It wasn't really like a fully developed leaf when I had to do all of this either. But there is a point for growth to come from right on the bottom of this node. So I'm hoping that eventually, as these roots get more and more developed, we will finally push out a new leaf. But all in all, like I said, I'm super happy with the outcome of this. I am very thankful to the viewer who suggested this to me. If you are watching, you rock. And if anybody else has experienced this kind of problem, this is what I would recommend you do. Just remove all of those old roots. I did dunk it into my hydrogen peroxide water mixture just to kill off anything that might be on there. And then I just treated it like a water propagation. And here we are now. So I definitely will continue to give you an update as things progress with this plant. But I am just super happy that something is going right now, because after losing those 2 plants and having to move my Silver Falls outside, it has just been a struggle. For real. The struggle is real. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I hope something I have shared with you today will help you in your plant journey. If so, please be sure to hit that like and or subscribe button down below. And if there's a plant you're currently struggling with, comment down below and let us know, because I'm sure somebody will have some advice for you that's going to help you out as well. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!